Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have the Thunderbolt Collection, a pair of obscure shoot 'em ups. What kind of taste will they have? Let's get cooking and find out. From publishers Cubite Classics and Pico, the Thunderbolt Collection were released on all current major platforms in August of 2022. This title is very intriguing as it contains a pair of titles that I wasn't very familiar with. Now, would I say this title is worth it? Not really, only for the novelty factor, and I'll get to a little bit of why here in a little bit, but there still is a bit that's interesting to check out. So, if you're into kind of like obscure novel shoot 'em ups that might be kind of mediocre, this might be a decent pickup, maybe on sale, but for the most part, most people I would say this is actually a pretty fair pass. So with that said, diving into the main menu. So when you start the game, you're taken to this screen here where we can select between Thunderbolt Fighting Plane and Thunderbolt 2. So there's some information about the releases on the right. So Thunderbolt was, the original one is 8-bit, and Thunderbolt 2 is 16-bit. So one of the things that is not given here is the release platforms and even the original developer. So these titles were developed by a Taiwanese game studio, GameTech, in the early 90s. So Thunderbolt Fighting Plane was released on the Famicom in 93. Thunderbolt 2 was released on the Sega Mega Drive or the Sega Genesis. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. So we're going to dive into Thunderbolt, show you a little bit of that, then dive into Thunderbolt 2. They're both very similar, so there's a little bit of menu option for screen formats if you want it to go and be fit, stretched, normal, as well as some filters. So this is Thunderbolt Fighting Plane. Starting the game, we're just dropped right into the stage. There's no options or anything in this one. And this one is very, very bare bones with just a shot button. So as you can see here, we've got various enemies that once we're destroyed will become sometimes power-ups. And the power-ups come in 4 different flavors. Depending on which flavor we pick up will be which weapon we have. So the red one is kind of your, or rather the white one is kind of your main shot that kind of becomes a spread. The red is this fun wiggly laser. And if you happen to pick up like the same color when you're at full power, you'll bomb the stage. There's also a flashing power-up that will do the same. So here we got some red, so we can get some wiggly woos going on here. There's also some missiles or drones that you can have. That's basically your secondary weapon. The drones are useful for defending yourself from enemy shots, and that's one thing that is kind of neat about like this title is instead of a life bar or losing 1-ups, just as long as you're not at base power with your weapon, you'll just like lose a level of your weapon's power up, and just as long as you're at a higher level than 1, you're not going to die. So that's a pretty decent life system, all things considered. The game itself has somewhat middle level difficulty, partially stemming from the fact that the stage just goes on and on. It's a little bit repetitive as far as the background and everything, but you've got those cute crabs in the constellations, and overall, I think for developers' efforts of developing their own title, as GameTech was kind of known for doing clone games and that sort of thing, I feel like this one is it's serviceable. Mediocre probably describes it best, but you know, all things considered, I don't think this is a bad shoot 'em up. Certainly not let's see, stellar by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely serviceable. So that's the first Thunderbolt. So from here, we'll jump back to the game select, and you can see there's a couple options you have. You can actually save your progress, and we can throw down a save point in one of the 5 slots that's available. I'm sure we'll save the game. And then from here, we can drop back to the game select. Once again, we have that options menu, which allows us to change the game filter, the mode, and volume, and you can also remap your controls, which is quite nice. Going back to the game select, we're taken to this main menu where we can select Thunderbolt 2. So keep in mind, the original Thunderbolt was developed for the Famicom. Thunderbolt 2 was developed on the Mega Drive in 1995. So, like, if you consider the platforms that they were released on, they're middling shoot-em-ups, definitely. Serviceable, but middling. So here we can start the game where we can go into the options menu. The option menu exists on this one. We can see that this game adds a bomb to our shots, and we have the standard Genesis ABC controller setup. We're just going to set things to easy difficulty. Not that it really seems like there's much difference between easy and normal. And this one does have some English text, which was, I guess, translated from the original, so the ROM isn't necessarily in the original state. So this game is more complex in a lot of ways. So, as I mentioned, we have our bomb, but there's also additional power-ups from what we have before. So there are 3 different shots instead of the 4 different shots that the original game had. So a little bit of a downgrade there, but the way that they work is slightly different. So as far as I can tell, shots will make you lose your weapon power, whereas physical contact won't. And it's possible to see your weapon levels on the right there. So we've got the straight laser, which is at level 1. You start at level 0. And then your sub-weapon below that, which in this case we have the homing missiles. It's also possible to get the drone. So as far as the weapons are concerned, your weapon power-ups are the P. S here represents speed, but like Gradius, you actually don't want to get too high a speed as things become very unwieldy. So we just swapped weapons from our straight laser to, back to the straight laser, to the wave, and I went from the missiles that we had equipped to the drone. I actually quite like the drone in this particular title, as it does a really good job of taking care of enemy shots. So unlike the first game that used that system where as long as you had levels in your weapons, you basically had health, in this title we actually have a life bar, and there are enemies that will drop life pickups as well. So take damage, either contact damage from enemies or enemy shots, and we'll lose life. There's also the bombs, and that was a bomb pickup that we received. And yeah, that's kind of like the core differences between this and the first game. So one thing that's to note is, especially for a Genesis title, this title does actually have a lot of slowdown, and I don't feel like the developers were particularly very savvy programming on the Mega Drive, as even the sprite movement just feels a little choppy. When you have large enemies on screen in particular. So that was something that I thought was interesting, and finding out that this title was originally developed for the Mega Drive was a bit of a surprise. So we found our way to the first boss. This boss itself is relatively straightforward. We just have to avoid that 5-way shot, and with the drones it's substantially easier to do so. So we've taken enough damage that we've lost some weapon power now. We're down to level 1 on our green straight laser. There's no boss health indication, so as usual, I'm not necessarily a fan of that. But the first boss I feel is pretty straightforward. The second boss gets to be a little bit unfair in the way that it will attack you, so I'm not as big a fan of that. And that's basically the Thunderbolt Collection served up for your enjoyment. So these two shoot-em-ups, the biggest minus flavor I can give this title is they're mediocre at best. They're not sterling examples of Famicom or Genesis shoot 'em ups, but like there are worse titles of shoot 'em ups out there. But especially given the era that they came out, there's certainly a lot of better shoot 'em ups that were available at the time. And indeed today as well. But I still thought this was an interesting collection for like what this unique collection is showing off. Basically, a pair of titles developed by a relatively unknown Taiwanese studio from the 90s. And so that element in and of itself makes this release worth it to me, but I don't think it would necessarily be a title that would be worth it to most gamers out there. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope you yourself have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.